What's the deal with Friday the 13th? And is it really an unlucky day? Well, let's go back to 1307, when one of history's most fearsome fighting orders was betrayed, tortured, killed, cursed, and then apparently avenged themselves from beyond the grave. The Knights Templar. If you've ever played a Crusader game like Kingdom Come Deliverance, then you'll know how effective these guys were at smashing heads. But how did this elite holy order get from slaying heretics to being hated and hunted across Europe? Let's find out. In the late medieval period, heresy was a capital offense in Christian lands, meaning anyone who refused to submit to the authority of the Church could be put to death for their beliefs. It was the job of the Knights Templar to root out and punish those who went against God and the teachings of the Church. Originally founded as a holy order in 1118 to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land, the Templars became increasingly militarized over the next 2 centuries, developing into a ferocious fighting force with strict religious vows and training, similar to that of modern special forces. By the early 13th century, they were so revered for their skill in combat that kings and popes alike called upon them to quell rebellions and stamp out heresy across Europe. And yet by the end of the century, they were universally hated and hunted down like animals. So what happened? Well, to answer that question, we have to travel south to the Kingdom of France. France in the late Middle Ages was a mess. The king was dead, having been killed in a tournament accident, leaving his 9-year-old son to rule under the control of 3 powerful regents. These 3, Philip the Fair, Robert of Artois, and William the Elder, ruled France more like a committee than a monarchy, and were renowned for their extravagance and lust for power. They commanded vast armies of men at arms and levied heavy taxes on their subjects to fund their endless wars. Not surprisingly, they were deeply unpopular. But there was one organization that was even more powerful than the ruling trio, the Knights Templar. As we said before, these guys were elite, holy warriors, ferocious in battle and utterly devoted to the service of God. But as the French crown grew weaker, the Templars grew in power and influence. In fact, in 1250, the last great medieval chronicler, Matthew Paris, described how the Grand Master of the Templars was second only to the Pope himself. But the French Regency didn't like this at all, and by 1260, they'd built up enough power to start seizing Templar property across the kingdom. This went on for years until finally, in 1270, the Pope stepped in to stop the seizures. But this victory was short-lived because soon after, Philip the Fair died and was succeeded by a new monarch, Philip IV. Now, you may be sensing where this is going, but if not, let us spell it out. Philip IV hated the Templars as much as his father had, and the struggle for power resumed. But now the French king had a secret weapon, a man named William de Nogaret. William de Nogaret was a royal counselor to Philip the Fair, and he resented the Templars deeply, blaming them for the death of his brother during the siege of a rebel castle in 1250. Ever since, he'd waited for his chance to destroy them, and now that he was close to the new king's ear, he was going to get it. His plan was simple. He would accuse the Templars of heresy and use his connections in the papacy to convince the Pope to arrest them. Then, while the Templars were distracted, he would seize their property across the kingdom. And so, on September 12, 1307, he sent a letter to Pope Clement V, accusing the Templars of every kind of immorality, from murder and sodomy to sacrilege and cannibalism. Incredibly, the Pope believed him and issued a papal bull ordering the arrest of every Templar across Christendom. And so on the morning of October, thousands of armed French soldiers burst into Templar buildings across the kingdom. The knights were caught totally off guard. Most had never held a weapon in their lives and had no idea how to fight, so they tried to flee. But everywhere they went, the citizens of Paris rose up against them, killing many outright. Others were taken to the town square and tortured, forced to watch their brothers and sisters die terrible deaths. After hours of torture, some confessed to Nogaret's charges, and so the propaganda machine began grinding. Accusations of blasphemy and heresy were spread far and wide, and the common folk believed them. Denayer took advantage of this by pillaging the Templars' buildings across France, stealing what he wanted and giving the rest to his friends. Meanwhile, The Templars who hadn't fled were executed by the sword, burned alive or crushed to death under heavy stones. Even the highest-ranking Templars were arrested and tortured, and yet none stood up to the accusations. Why? Because the Templars weren't given a fair trial. That was never the point. If they were innocent, it wouldn't matter. The king had already made up his mind, and so had the citizens of Paris. They were guilty by association. But perhaps the saddest fate of all was reserved for the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. We don't know much about Jacques de Molay. He was elected Grand Master in 1295 following the death of his predecessor. But when the arrests came, he was away on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He returned to Paris soon after and offered his submission to the French king, saying that he would stand trial in Rome. But Philip IV wasn't having it. He ordered that the Grand Master be brought to the Bastille and tortured. Incredibly, he survived this, but when his successor, Geoffrey de Charny, surrendered without a fight, de Molay changed his tune and declared that he would never surrender to the king. With that, the executioners were called, and the Grand Master was tortured and burned alive in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral on March 13, 1308. And here's where things get interesting, because as the flames consumed him, he uttered a curse upon his tormentors. He foretold that the Pope and the King would both be dead within a year, and that God would hold them accountable for their crimes against the Templars. And do you know what? He was right. Pope Clement V died 5 months later, supposedly of a broken heart after hearing of the Templars' fate. And King Philip IV died a few months after that, allegedly poisoned by Queen Isabella, who blamed her husband for throwing her into a dungeon in 1305. Coincidence? Maybe. But de Molay's prediction sparked conspiracy theories that the Templars had avenged themselves from beyond the grave, causing the deaths of the very people who betrayed them. Stories like this led to the widespread belief that Friday the 13th was an unlucky day, which still persists today. But what's interesting is that the French king and the Pope weren't the only ones to die. Geoffrey de Charny, who succeeded de Molay, died in mysterious circumstances too. He'd been captured while trying to escape France and was imprisoned in London. But as his trial was set to begin, he was found dead in his cell, having reportedly been strangled. Some believe that he too was a victim of the Grand Master's curse, but in reality, it was probably just a case of bad air in the medieval equivalent of a jailhouse. Either way, the deaths of 3 leaders in less than a year doesn't sound lucky to us. What's clear is that the Templars had powerful enemies in the French monarchy and the Catholic Church, but also that they had plenty of supporters among the general public. In fact, the French citizens' anger over the executions was so great that an angry mob stormed the home of William de Nogaret and killed him. So what really caused the downfall of the Knights Templar? Well, we can think of 2 big reasons. First, they were instruments of the state, so whenever the state fell, the Templars fell along with it. Second, the Templars were feared across Europe. Their methods of extracting confessions from heretics were so brutal that eventually people were scared to even associate with them. Ultimately, though, it's hard to say exactly why the Templars lost the favor of the people in the church. After all, we're dealing with a period of history almost a millennium ago. But what we do know is that they went from elite warriors of God to hated criminals overnight, and this sudden reversal of fortune has fascinated people ever since, leading to books, TV shows, and movies about the Templars to this day. If you want to learn more about them, we recommend checking out Assassin's Creed, which has a whole storyline based around them. Thanks for watching.